Hopefully it's recording. Looks like it's recording. Hey, we're back. We're actually going to do some more theory. Sorry, I've been out of town and lazy. Let's be honest. So the last time we talked about how we talked about scale degrees, and we talked about what makes a major scale. If you haven't watched the first two videos, probably a good time to press pause on this one and go watch my other two music theory videos, because we're going to be building on that. So if you didn't watch those, it's going to be a little bit hard to follow. So in the past, we've been looking at scales that ascend from C to the next C, like this. So if I were to play this out loud, major scale, and we discussed that that is major because of a specific combination of whole and half steps. Now, the question is, if I move this so that it starts and ends on a different note, like say, for instance, G, what happens? Well, let's look. So from G to A is a whole step. We talked about that in that first video. From A to B is also a whole step. From B to C is a half step. I remember I was doing this with lyrics. So we had whole step, a whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Okay? Now let's make sure those look like they're in the beginning. So notice that what's happened here is right here, this half and this whole are switched because the pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If I play this out loud, you can hear that last part is wrong. We used this as an example in our other video. So the way that we're going to effectively switch those is what we need to do is we need to make this note further away from the note below it and closer to the note above it. And I have two ways of doing that. Or rather, I have two ways of changing a note to do that. I can raise it or lower it. And the way that I raise it is I can add what is called a sharp. That's this symbol right here. When I do that, these automatically switch. And now we're left with whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. I can play in that key as long as if I sharp every F as I'm playing, magically things sound nice. I can so the whole and half steps are now correct. Now, what would have happened if I would have done the wrong thing? What would have happened if I would have used a flat symbol, which lowers a note like that? Well, this note is now a half step lower than what it was before. So what is half minus half? Half minus half is 0. There's no space now here. There's no space there. Yeah, it's not gonna let me do that. And now this is like whole plus. Okay? Remember, half plus half equals whole. Whole minus half equals half. Okay? What this was before was a half step. The 0 right here was a half step. I have subtracted a half step from a half step. What's half minus half? It's nothing. In fact, if I play this out loud, isn't that weird? So it's important to recognize that there are pitches that can be spelled two ways, and they produce the same tone. This pitch and this pitch are the same. F flat is the same as E. That's what happens if you try to flat it. Okay? So you don't want to do that. What we want to do is we want to sharp it, which makes this a whole and this a half. Okay? Let's try a different one. Let's start our scale this time on, oh, I don't know, E. Now let me play what it sounds like right now when I just ascend from E to E. Now notice, aurally, as in the sound of it, orally, you can tell that the scale is not major. Major was this sounds. And moreover, notice that orally, you can tell that this scale is less major than the one we just did. Before we changed the G scale, there's only one thing wrong with it. This one has a lot more things wrong with it. And so it sounds less major. So let's go figure out what the whole and half step relationships are between these notes before we try to change anything. Because just like in life, in order to know what to fix, you have to figure out where the wrong things are, okay? So we're going to do that. So E to F was a half step. F to G was a whole step. G to A was a whole step. A to B, whole step. B to C, half step. C to D, whole step. D to E, whole step. And again, I'm just pulling these from my original C scale. If you go watch that first video, I mentioned that the C scale shows us what whole and half steps already exist, okay? So this one's totally wrong. Now, this brings up an interesting conundrum. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it work? Do we want to start maybe over here and fix this one? Do we want to maybe start at the top? My advice to you is to always start and fix from the bottom up. If you start and you fix each step one at a time from the bottom to the top, you will always end up with the correct whole half pattern with the correct sharps and flats. If you try to start in the middle, things start to go wrong really fast. So the first thing we want to do is fix this half step. Now I have two ways to fix this half step. I can either lower this note or I can raise this note because it's a half step. Remember, half plus half equals whole. We need to move these notes further apart. So I need to either move the bottom note down or move the top note up. The question being, how do I know which one? How do I know which one to move? Well, this is actually an easy answer, and that is you can't move the bottom one. Because when we're making a scale, when we're trying to figure out a scale, by definition, we want our scale to start and end on E. We don't want it to start and end on a low E, an E flat, right? We want it to start and end, just on E. So I know, by definition, that I'm going to be raising this note right here. So let's do that. Let's raise this note. We raised the F, we added a sharp. So now this is a whole step. But more importantly, this whole step, we've now, remember, you change both sides of the note, right? Because I pulled it away from the one below it, and I pulled it close to the one above it. So I took a half step away from this one. Now that's not right, right? We don't want whole, half, whole, whole. We want whole, whole, half. So, as I said, if you work from the bottom up, things will just start to fix themselves as you move up. Like, watch. So I want this to be a half step, okay? I can't change this F sharp. This F sharp gave me this whole step. So I'm going to raise this G. That makes that a whole step. And it makes this whole a half step, right? Whole, half. Hey, look, we're doing great. So the next one that's wrong is this half step right here. And I know I'm not going to lower this because I like this whole step, right? I like the whole step below the B. I want to make the half step above the B bigger. So same thing. Add a sharp. Okay. Half and whole messed up. They're flipped, right? We want this to say whole, half here at the end. We want to say whole, half. We had this exact problem on the G scale, and the way we fixed it was we just added a sharp. That flips these, and magically I have a scale that begins and ends on E and follows the correct pattern. Okay? So, a thing that I want to mention right here. We had to do a lot to change this scale. We had to add 4 sharps to it. Notice we did not add 2 sharps and 2 flats, or 3 sharps and 1 flat, or 3 flats and 1 sharp. When we are building, and I'm going to have to write this out in huge free text. Where's my free text? Plain text. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to write this in giant bold letters because it needs to be bold. Never mix sharps and flats in a major scale. I'm just going to cheat a little bit and let you know that as we're building all the scales, there are no major scales that need both sharps and flats added to them to make them major. There are scales that mix sharps and flats, but they're not major. They're some other thing. Okay? In a major scale, when you're trying to make a scale major, you will never mix sharps and flats. Now, why is this helpful? This is helpful because remember, we started here and when we sharped this F, we knew we couldn't lower this E. We knew we needed to raise this F. And as soon as I put a sharp on that F, that should tell me more than just E has an F sharp in it, that scale E has an F sharp in it. It should also tell me that all the other alterations that I'm going to make as I move up are going to be sharps. Okay? So that's sort of a little hint as far as like, what do I do as I'm building? Never, ever, 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 ever mix sharps and flats in a major scale. They don't exist. You don't need to worry about it. When we get to minor, particularly harmonic and melodic minor, we may have some that have both. But right now, in major, we don't. Let's do another one. Let's do one that begins and ends on F. So I'm just drawing my ascending notes that ascend from F to F. Okay. I figure out what my steps are, and they happen to be whole, 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 half, whole, 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 or nope, whole, whole, half. Okay. So, in this instance, the only thing that's wrong here is that this whole and this half are switched. Remember, we want to go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Hopefully you're noticing that a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times as you're doing this, you're going to notice that the errors in the whole half pattern, the things that make them not major, will usually come in pairs. And that's because when I sharp or flat a note, I change both sides of it. So generally both sides of a note are going to be wrong, because if they're not, it gets a little confusing, right? Just like on the E scale. So the note that is wrong here, move these over so we can see them between the notes. These are the two that are wrong, which means I'm going to change this note right here. And remember, I only have two things I can do to it. I can make it higher or I can make it lower. I can sharp it or I can flat it. So I'm either going to sharp or flat it. I'm not going to do some other weird thing. So does this note need to be higher or does this note need to be lower? Let's take a look. Let's raise it and see what happens. If I raise it, this B is now close to this C. If I lower it, it's now closer to this A. Notice that we're getting this thing again. There's somebody at the door here. Give me just a second. And we'll finish this. Oh, sounds like they're gone. Okay, I got this whole plus 0 thing because I moved it close to here, which got rid of the half step, and I moved it further away from here, which made this like whole plus. Never want whole plus in these, right? So let's go back to what we had, which is this. Let's lower it. I've now made it closer to this A, which reduces this by a half step. I've pulled it away from the C, which increases this distance, and I now have F major. So that's all you have to do to make scales major. That's all you have to do to use scales that have different tonics, right? To move the tonic to a different note. Because sometimes we want the tonic to be something other than C. So, our plans for next time, on probably next week, are to look at major scales and to ask ourselves, is there any major scale that starts and ends on an accidental? Can I begin with my first note modified? The answer is, of course, yes, and I'll explain how that works next time. Until then, see you later. Hopefully we'll have some more Witness tonight, maybe tomorrow, we'll see. That one I'm not promising any schedule on. I can't promise when I'm going to have time for games, but I'd like to keep playing through the Witness too. So that's our music theory.